So how many people here own a Kinect? Cool. And do you remember what the setup experience was like? Was it exceedingly difficult? Not too bad? Easy? Pretty good? Okay. Well, we may have had a small part of that in the user research in making it a pretty good or good experience. And are other people here gamers or a couple gamers back here? User researchers, PMs, what? Writers, UX people, designers. Okay. All right. So I'll tell a story basically how a small Blink team and Xbox team systematically conducted the in-home research, kind of what we learned from this guy and others like him. He's kind of crouched. You can't really see his bare feet, but he's crouched rather golem-like in his living room, poring over a quick start guide there. And then I'll go through some examples of how the Xbox designers and developers really responded to the findings from the field research to make a good experience, setup experience even better. And I can't claim, I want to throw out a couple disclaimers. First of all, the presentation's been vetted up through Microsoft, and hopefully I won't be revealing any proprietary information. They wouldn't like that very much, so I can't talk too much in detail about everything we did. But another aspect of this is when we do research out in the field, we're taking photos of people, we're taking videos of people, and we make agreements with people that we don't disclose their personal information. So a lot of the photos, a lot of the video, a show has pictures where faces blotted out, and I'm showing backs of people, so you hopefully, none of your friends will show up or relatives or anything like that. And then I want to say that I didn't personally design the Kinect. I wish I could take credit for that or for any of the games, the Kinect games, but I can't, unfortunately. But anyway, those are a couple things I wanted to mention. So when it was launched 2.5 years ago, Kinect units sold fast enough to make the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest selling ever consumer electronics device. It got really high reviews, and even now it's still, if you believe Amazon reviews, it's still 4.5 stars or so. It's a really popular consumer electronics device. And Microsoft just announced a couple weeks ago that the sales had reached 24 million. So as a user researcher, it's pretty gratifying knowing that you had an impact that affected that many people. So that's quite a large number. And just for some context, the Nintendo Wii broke a lot of new ground with motion-based gaming using the Wiimote or the handheld wand. But Kinect really took this to the next level. And by getting rid of the handheld controller completely and letting users play just using gestures and movements and by tracking their skeletons and body movements. So Microsoft prepped everyone for the release with the message that you are the controller. You are the controller. And the photos that just ran here are from promo images, and you notice that they're of families and kids, and that's an audience that prior to the Kinect release hadn't really been targeted by Xbox. So this was a new audience for Microsoft. And so when you think about traditional Xbox games, you think about the franchises like Halo or Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, some of the first-person shooters or role-playing games. You don't really think about, at least a few years ago, you didn't think about family-friendly games like Kinect Sports or Dance Central, Dance Revolution or Kinectimals. And so that was a whole different paradigm shift. And now we're seeing a few games that appeal to more of that core gaming audience, that original gaming audience. But my point is that this first release really targeted. They had a whole new group of people that they were trying to bring into that Xbox experience. So that was one of the key questions, is how, in the research, is how would that audience respond to this device, and could they use it effectively? Could they do the setup effectively? So we recruited a lot of families to participate in the in-home research, as well as a lot of people from the other audiences, the other persona types that the Xbox group had. So I wanted to I'll roll a few videos, and just to kind of give you an idea of how people responded to the technology once they had it set up in their homes.
think it's awesome. I would look for more games that were like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the magic part of Kinect, and you don't, the goal, one of the goals of the design team was to really get people into this magical experience as quickly as possible and get them through the setup, through the connecting of the wires, through the software setup as fast as possible to get to this kind of experience. Because they knew that this experience was going to be, really positive, really immersive, and interesting for people. So you've got the new audience. You've also got a new piece of hardware, a couple new pieces of hardware actually. So Kinect, when it first came out, was released as a standalone sensor, like you see here. It was also bundled with a new console, the Xbox 360S. So when we took these into people's homes, we took both the individual Kinect and had people that were used to Xbox 360 already setting that up, and we took the whole bundle, so it was a brand new system. So that's how it looks like in the promo pictures. This is more of what it looks like in, we call it the Christmas morning scenario, where you've got mayhem in the house, and the kids have just opened a present, and they've pulled it all out, and you've got the controller of the Xbox, the controller of the Xbox, all the cords, the game, and the kids, and dog barking, and everything happening, and everybody just wants to play as quickly as possible. So some of the research questions, as a researcher, it's always interesting. We defined a lot of things up front. We had so many questions we were interested in. But when we began to collaborate with the Xbox teams, there was still a lot of, they had done a ton of testing in the labs, they'd done a ton of research on this, but there's still a lot of questions that they didn't quite know how the product would go over. And so what would that first out-of-box setup be like? What would the first user experience be like? Would this non-traditional audience of gamers be able to set it up and get playing quickly? Would users understand the gestural interaction? We just had a conversation at lunch about this. Is how did we get people, how did Microsoft get people to understand the gestures? What would happen in the uncontrolled family settings with kids jumping around, pets getting in the way, et cetera? And would people understand this concept of a play space? So you've got an invisible boundary that's a few feet back from the Kinect, a few feet to either side that you can actually jump around and play in. Would people understand that? How do you communicate that in the software? And in addition to this, we had questions about international markets. We knew that a lot of testing had been done in the US, but internationally, how would this technology go over? What are some of the constraints with home sizes, apartment sizes, and so on that might affect the experience of the product? So as I mentioned, it was part of a large R&D effort at Microsoft that involved what I've heard is thousands of users overall. And so the in-home testing that we did in 200 homes was just a small part of this effort. But they had a long tail of technology research building up to a product concept, and I imagine they did a ton of market research, focus group testing to get sort of the product developed, and then prototyping with hardware, software, and they had to release an SDK for game developers, and all of this went on sort of before we were involved. But we became involved in April 2010. The product launch was in November 2010. So we had about 7 months where we did this research. And I have to say that there's still a ton of areas that we were able to influence, and I'll give some examples of those as I go through the talk today. But there was still a lot of active work going on the hardware. The hardware was mostly baked, but some of the connections for the hardware were still in flux, as was the firmware for the hardware products and the software, obviously, of games. Packaging, documentation, all of that was still in the works. So we spent, as I mentioned, 8 months testing. We went to 14 different cities in 6 different countries. And I think the way to think about this research is as an iterative process, because every time we went out in the field in a different wave, we had a new software build, we had a new combination of hardware. When we first went out, there were test boxes, Xboxes, and sometimes we had to take 2 or 3 boxes actually into each home, because a box wouldn't, it wasn't a integrated system yet. Each box would do something slightly different, so we had to set one up and then dismantle it, or have the user set it up, dismantle it, set up another one, and so on. So it was quite a logistical exercise, just getting all the equipment into people's homes and testing. That was at the beginning. At the end, things became integrated and much more streamlined. So Seattle was our base. Blink is located right here in Seattle, obviously, and Microsoft is just across the drink over on the east side. So we tested a lot in the Puget Sound area, but also branched out in other areas of the US. Paris, Dijon, France, Hamburg, Germany, Manchester, England, London, and Tokyo. So we wanted to see a wide contrast of housing types from kind of the typical maybe US suburban home to older homes where the rooms might be darker and smaller, so we have these lighting issues and other things, physical properties in homes that we were curious about as well. And I prefer to go to places like Paris, where I could go to homes with flowers, where I could sip espresso with the participant and have a croissant. And my colleagues, I'd send to outskirts of Denver and home with, you can't really see the skull and crossbones or Confederate flag in the window, but you get the idea. You don't quite know what you're going. Marcus, our camera person here, and he's helped me with some of these studies, and you don't quite know exactly what you're getting until you drive up to the place. And I like to say that it's real user research when you can smell what was for breakfast or smell what's for dinner, and sometimes that means smelling a person's pets, and I won't go into any more gross things than that, or their socks or something like that. But you just meet a great variety of people, and we deliberately targeted actually a lot of people in a lot of different demographic segments, income strata, and so on. So we really wanted to see how a broad audience would respond to this product. Obviously, single-family homes are very important, especially in the U.S., but we wanted to see how the product would do in places like these row houses in Manchester, England, or these are UK term is council flats, but this is government housing in Paris, and that's just a view from the train in Tokyo. So a lot of multifamily homes as well. We saw quite a few surprises along the way. Like this is a place in the outskirts of Tokyo on the right where the father in the home had a barbershop below, and we tested. Our test participant was actually the son, and we set it up above, and he really liked the product and everything, but he said, "Oh, I love it, but I just can't jump on the floor because my dad is shaving people with a straight edge razor down below, and I just don't want to surprise him." You can fill in the blanks there. You don't want to surprise him. So the outside of homes is important, but really what we're interested in is the interior spaces. And U.S. suburban home, you've got lots of room to, the Kinect excels in this sort of environment where you can set the Kinect in a variety of different places. You can detect people it can detect people really easily. The product does very well. This is a home in France with a family with an adult son who was our participant, and they had a lot of room. They could move things. They were great. That was a great session. But then what happens when you've got more constrained spaces like this bachelor pad in Tokyo? It's got its manga collection all over the place, and you had a couple futons. There were only, there's another futon over here, and really limited space. And so it's a bit more challenging. The product has constraints, and it doesn't perform quite as well. In this case, it actually, he was able to get it working. He ended up jumping on his other futon to get it to work, and he liked it enough, but to get it working really well. We were interested in where people would place the Kinect, and then most homes have something like a ottoman or a coffee table. This one happens to be pretty heavy. We were wondering, would people move those things on their own, and would the software and Quick Start Guide effectively communicate that they needed to create a space? And then what happens when you can't move something easily, like a fish tank? How would that affect the product and the product experience? And what kinds of investments do people already have in gaming equipment? So we've got Rock Band and Wii and all kinds of stuff. an Xbox, and a lot of homes you see that have, where they have multiple gaming systems already, a lot of investment, a lot of money tied up in that. And so how did Kinect fit into that sort of environment? And were there physical connections available? And here, the dirty secret in all our homes, or a lot of our homes, is all the spaghetti and the mess of wiring in the back and the cabling. And you take pictures, we go in and take pictures of that. But would people be able to just physically wire and connect and fit it up in an elegant way? So the testing approach we used. The testing approach we used was the same, regardless of the iteration. We spent about 2 hours in each home, and we began by interviewing people in their main TV or entertainment area. Then we would give them the box. We would pack it up, even when it was in prototype state, we would pack up the box as though it were to the specs of that the packaging team provided. So it was pretty realistic that the quick start guide would be on top, and then the Kinect and the other wiring would be, the wires would be under that in a specific order. So we really wanted to check that order made sense to people. So we didn't do a lot of, aside from the instances when I talked about earlier where we had multiple Xboxes that we needed to bring in the home, we didn't intervene a lot. We just did a lot of observation. We would give, we explained the purpose of the product in a very limited way, what it would do for them, and then gave them the boxes and let them go at it. And they knew that this was a 2-hour session, and that they would be doing something that involved gaming. So basically, we're there to know where something confusing happened, when they were blocked, and then just observing the social dynamics, what happens when a mom and her son get together, and how are they, these types of sessions were really interesting, the social exchanges and how people would explain the product to each other and how it would be set up. And that was some of our, I think when there were multiple people involved in a family, those were some of the more interesting sessions. So in addition to the physical setup, there's a digital setup. This was an earlier prototype of digital setup that people would need to go through. And this is the first time that they would experience gesturing. And so there were a lot of different iterations of what types of, you can see, you may not be able to see, but an avatar here. And so there were lots of starts and stops on what would be most effective for the gesture and progressing through screens. And again, we were just there observing, noting where problems would occur. This is another prototype of the setup. So after they had selected language, the setup was complete, then the software would go straight into the initial game. And so we tested a few different games out in the field. This is the one that was eventually built into the product, which is River Rush or Kinect Adventures. It's another family in France. And as the summer progressed into fall, we had other games like Kinect Sports. And this guy was actually a light in Minnesota somewhere, Minneapolis or St. Paul. And he was actually a lightweight boxer, so it was kind of interesting to get his feedback on Kinect. And he said it was pretty realistic. There wasn't a lot of latency, so he had a pretty good time. So in addition to the physical digital first game experience, we also were interested just in a lot of measurements within people's homes. So how big was their play space? What we tried to correlate the size of play space with any problems we saw or obstacles that were in the way. So we did a lot of just physical measurements and diagramming. We looked at, we did room sketches just to show the lighting, things like fireplace locations relative to the TV and the sensor, the Kinect sensor, that sort of thing. So just so you don't think that user research is all easy, I don't know if you can see this, but kind of sweat through the khakis here. And holding up the thermometer, it's 96 degrees. There's a, this is in Japan, and it was a small studio apartment, and we arrived, and participant was very apologetic. She said, "Oh, my AC is just broken," and it was, this is the middle of summer in Tokyo, and humidity is 99%, and it's really, really hot. There's a local news guy here in Seattle, King 5, named Jim Foreman, and they always send him out in the big weather events and up to the top of the Space Needle when it's 50-mile-an-hour winds, or out somewhere where there's a flood, and you see him in his Gore-Tex. And so I'm sort of, my wife and I joke that I'm sort of the Jim Foreman of user research. So we also took a really iterative, responsive approach to the research. And as I mentioned, the setup software changed weekly, but one of the things that we could control, or we had another area where we had some impact, was just on the quick start guides themselves. We would observe through sessions, how people were using and consuming the diagrams. And if something didn't work, we'd literally go back to the hotel at night with scissors and start cutting things up and repositioning graphics and text, and then go out the next day and test that again, or sometimes the next week. And we were in contact and consulting with the user assistance writers, and so they were sort of aware of what we were doing. But the diagram, or the photo on the right, we call the wall of shame. And the reason we did that, it was an attempt to tell people how to make a particular hardware connection. And we tried about 8 or 10 different iterations of these diagrams. And they're the little tags you see on cords. And of course, maybe not so obvious, it wasn't obvious to anybody at the beginning anyway, but most of the time we ignore those things. They're just warnings, right? They're just things like, this contains high voltage. You're going to shock yourself if you put it in the bathtub or whatever. You just learn to ignore those things. And of course, almost to a person, every single user, regardless of the color, whether there's a stop sign on it or anything, people just sort of blew it off. And so there was a different solution that the dev team came up with to address the problem, which was to actually pre-connect the hardware in the box, which is a very painful and costly decision to make, and at the end of after everything had already been spec'd out. But after they did that, we saw 0 problems, and before that, almost everybody had a problem making this simple connection. So I'll go through a few other examples of optimizing the user experience, the first use experience. And the things I want to talk about were that packaging and quick start guides made a tremendous difference in the initial UX. Things became really interesting when people set up the product together, especially families. And because of those unique requirements, the setup needed to communicate in very particular ways to get people to do what they needed to do. So this one, let's start with packaging. I love this video, so I'll let it speak for itself.
They make the boxes tougher than it is to actually hook it up.
Can you talk about the packaging and opening the package?
I would have ripped it. It is not, the boxing was not easy to open.
Okay.
I would have just ripped, I would have taken a knife, cut it.
Just cut it open.
I would have just cut it open. If I knew it was mine and I'm keeping it, I would have just taken a kitchen knife, cut the boxes, and been into it.
Okay, on both of them?
On both of them.
Okay.
The second one was just as hard as the first one.
Okay.
So that little, whatever it was, 20-second clip had an enormous impact. Because obviously it's not a good idea if people are taking their kitchen knives and ripping through boxes. So, and prior to this, we had seen actually a lot of other users have difficulty just getting the Kinect box open as it was spec. And so the problem was that, you can see on the left, it had a little notch, and you're supposed to find the notch and lift it out, and then open the box. and people weren't discovering that. So the solution was to cut a larger arc in the box. And again, after that happened, after that change was made, which was costly, which was difficult, which involved a lot of fighting back at Microsoft, we didn't see any problems anymore. So that's what actually shipped in the end. So in terms of family and social dynamics, setup needs to be performed by one person standing about 6 feet back from the sensor, from the Kinect sensor. And others need to get out of the way. But what happened was that once people saw themselves being projected on a TV, it was like sort of a house of mirrors. Everybody jumped in and wanted to be part of it, right? And so that became kind of messy. So then it became a further challenge to try to explain to people that no, you have to get out of the way. So let's see here. This is a family out in somewhere out in the outskirts of Seattle in Maple Valley, I think.
Whoa. Nice.
There you go, that's pretty good.
So you have to stand
Eventually.
6 feet. So anyone has to move everything they're telling us?
Oh, look, there's a circle on the bottom of the floor.
And move over there.
Uh-oh, it scanned.
Now go.
It didn't. It's so cool. Okay, now.
So the other problem was that you need to stand up, and a lot of people would, but there were a number of people who just because of controller-based gaming and the expectation you can sit down, they would just stay in the seats. And there were a lot of different prototypes that were tested trying to get people to get up, and not all were effective. So some more examples. And we talked about, or I mentioned the different gesturing styles, and so, on top of everything else, just remember this is a novel system introducing a whole new interaction language, right? And so what we observed were people gesturing in very unique ways. Some would use, kind of a fist. We call it fists of fury. The Vulcan salute came up a couple times, and a lot of pointing and just waving in different ways. So that was a huge challenge that needed to be overcome. I'll give you another favorite video clip here of a guy in his gesturing style, and a bit of his reaction to the product.
Sorry.
That's awesome.
Whoa. English. What I point with my finger? Oh. Did I just do that? That's awesome. Did I do that, or is that, am I just hallucinating here?
Yeah, he was one of several people who didn't seem to mind crawling over the couch, even though that's not obviously the best way of experiencing the product. So I'm going to show what eventually became the setup, and just note some of the instructions to stand up, stand alone, put down the controller, how they communicated to clear the area. And again, and standing in front of the sensor. And I wish I could take credit for some of these, but I thought that the designers at Microsoft did a really nice job of communicating all of these things. At this point, the user's actually taken over. notice how big the targets are. And that's it. I mean, we started with, there were a couple of approaches to sort of gamify the setup experience and make that a little bit more immersive, a little bit more engaging and fun, but really, and it worked for a lot of people, but it didn't work for a lot of other people. And so the common denominator became this very short, but direct setup experience that just got the job done very nicely, very quickly. So in terms of the research itself, we brought back a lot of unique data insights from the field that Xbox teams weren't seeing in their labs. They did a great amount of testing, but the field research really brought back some things that were unique in different ways. And the audience there, the dev and design and dev teams were very receptive and built a lot of changes into the first release of the product. So some of the things that the field testing influenced were just the retail packaging, as you saw in the previous example, the quick start guides, the digital setup, the choice of the first game. And this is an area where the international research, at least in Japan, we might have had a different recommendation there, because there was a lot more sensitivity in Japan about jumping on the floor and making noise that might disrupt neighbors. So, but the River Rush game, you can play it without jumping a lot. You do jump, and that was a concern that if this were solely a product for Japan, there may have been a different choice in introductory games. The research also influenced how play space was communicated, and this was what the design team came up with. And then finally, the Kinect tuner troubleshooting tool was something we also tested in the process. And by identifying problems and obstacles through the field research, we helped the support team anticipate some of the issues that they may have once the product was released, and they could then build in troubleshooting content and topics that would address some of those issues. So I kind of wanted to generalize, and maybe we can leave a couple of minutes here for questions as well, but just generalizing, why do in-home testing, or where it fits in with other research methods. And it's not a trivial thing to do. It's not an inexpensive thing to do. It involves a lot of effort. But sort of along the spectrum of things being completely out of context, or things being in context, and then self-reporting. So you have, and actually observing people doing things. Self-reporting could be, bringing people in for focus groups or taking surveys. And none of these, I'm not knocking any of these methods. They all have their place, and we certainly use all of them. But one-on-one interviews, you're kind of getting closer to observing people in their context of use. Beta testing is great. It's done in the actual context, but we don't have the ability to observe people doing beta testing a lot. Probably an ideal would be to be an ethnographer or video ethnography, where you could do some pure observation. But we couldn't do that for this product. It didn't fit the research questions or goals. So in-home testing and usability testing is great. We can do a lot of simulation in the lab. We can set up a pretty realistic environment and bring people in to try something out. But we're not actually getting all the variables that we found in people's homes, and all the things that I haven't shown, like the pets barking and people arguing about setup and all of those sorts of things. So the in-home testing was a really nice way to get at a lot of information that we couldn't get elsewhere, but that wasn't being done elsewhere through other research. So why do it internationally? I was just in London a few weeks ago on a different project, and And we know that you don't tip as much in the UK, right? And I suppose, I also, when I go to different cities, I also go running. So this is out running in a park near where our hotel was. And presumably you don't want to litter in a park, but no tipping or litter together. I really needed a cultural informant to tell me exactly what that meant. I don't know. It probably has something to do with tipping garbage cans or animals. I don't know. So this is why you go to other places, just to get that insight and information. So kind of the approach for testing with real people in real settings. One of the approaches is just to embrace, not everything's controlled, so you can't control it. It's like, it's not like a usability lab, but you learn a lot through those uncontrolled instances and environments. You can't recruit for, predict when somebody's going to jump up on their couch, but it's certainly interesting to see that. You might actually learn something from it. On the product, and I'm talking about any product here, not just Kinect, it doesn't need to be completely baked. You can take out prototypes, you can take out other studies. We've just taken out little form models and asked people, where would you put this? Or how would you fit this in with your existing equipment? Same with software, you can always do a Wizard of Oz kind of experiment. And we tried to recruit. We had a lot of recruiting questions. We tried to screen people very carefully for key characteristics, but we didn't try to match people exactly to the personas that Microsoft had developed. We looked at demographics. We looked at key characteristics we wanted to recruit for, but it's almost impossible to recruit for an exact persona type. Some of the things that we do, just in general, going out in the home, we try to reduce the fear factor by sending, in advance, we send photos of ourselves to participants so they know who to expect and how many people that are going to be showing up in their homes. We try to build on trust relationships that market research companies already have with participants. So these are, the people we use for this research are paid, right? So they're paid study participants for the most part. And they have if I'm going to Austin or I'm going to Raleigh or Paris or Dijon, I can work with a company there that has already established a working relationship with participants for the study. So I show up at their house and I don't usually say I'm from blank or I'm from Microsoft. I might say I'm here for the market research firm X study, and or if we revealed who the study is for, we might mention I'm here for the Xbox study, that sort of thing. We try to be a good guest when we're in people's homes. We don't wander around. We don't make disparaging remarks about their furniture or their children or their art. We respect boundaries. This is an example of when I decided not to respect a boundary because I really liked this guy. The fact that he had his gamer tag tattooed on his arm, and so I said, I got to get a photo of that. So some of I think the success factors for this particular project, in thinking about any project or trying to institute UX more in your organization is really the importance of a UX champion. And we had a champion at a fairly high level in the Xbox organization. This is a photo of Mohammed Shakari. And he owned a lot of the hardware user experience, and he made sure that teams acted on the results. So I think he was really instrumental in the fact that there was such a great uptake of the results from this study back at Microsoft. One of the ways he was able to do that was he had a really great PM on his side that handled getting all the information from our field work into the bug tracking system. They provided us with the hardware, the logistical support, so we didn't have to worry about somebody building the product and getting it to us. We could focus on what we did best as a consulting team, which was getting out in the field and interacting with users. And then the PM and the folks back at Microsoft could set up the meetings, and we would go over and meet with teams, but all the groundwork for that was taken care of. So it was really ideal, actually, to have a great PM. We built up a great research team, both here and with our contacts at Microsoft, and to develop the research questions. And also when we went to other cities and other places, we have a network of partners. And I found that working with great partners like the guy on the right was really fundamental in getting the work done. So in terms of reporting, we modified that as we went along. Almost done here. And we tried to keep the reporting. We started with kind of a standard approach where we'd go out and then come back and write a report. Well, there wasn't time for that. So we kept the reporting really lightweight. We sometimes reported findings through email. If we start to see a trend in a particular iteration, 3 people experienced this so far, all 3 did X, Y, or Z. And then we found that video worked really effectively in communication back in Redmond. So, oftentimes we'd be out researching all day, we'd go back to the hotel at night and just start generating video clips and then upload those over SharePoint and get those back to Microsoft. We went, after we get back from a city, we would do a top-line findings report, sort of a day after report, and then we would meet over at Microsoft to triage the report and then communicate findings to teams that needed to hear about it. And I think another success factor was just the flexibility. As researchers, you kind of maybe go into a project and want things to stay the same so you can see what happens with a lot of different subjects. Here, we had to be much more agile and flexible and change things and understand that things change from week to week and just sort of design a new study almost every time we went out. It's all about Kinect, right? So a lot of things stayed the same, but we were always testing new things as we went too. And I think with that, there might be a couple minutes. Are you starting to?
You're good.
Good? Okay. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to